Hi, everyone. My name's Ellie Whitfort. I'm a senior engineer at League of Geeks, and thank you for coming to hear me talk a bit about the AI we've put together for our game Jumplight Odyssey, which we've recently released into early access. So, who am I? I've been in the industry for 10 years now. I spent most of that time at Samurai Punk, so I worked on titles including Screen Sheet, Feather, American Dream, and we did Table of Tales in collaboration with Tin Man Games. I've also been at League of Geeks a little bit 10 years ago when I worked on Armello, and I'm back there now to be working on Jumplight Odyssey. So what is Jumplight Odyssey? Well, here's a marketing pitch I stole from online somewhere, but it's a kind of roguelike space colony sim thing. And I even grabbed a trailer so that can actually show you what it looks like if you haven't seen it anywhere before.
We were once a thriving civilization, explorers who could always find their way home by the beacon of the forever star. Now we are a people on the run, desperately staying one jump ahead of the warmongering Zootopian empire. Admiral Voltan will not rest until our light is extinguished across the galaxy. With no home beyond our starship, we must rely on each other and what little we can find among the stars. Our vessel is our fortress, sanctuary, and mode of escape. We must adapt in order to survive, refitting our starship to support both the mission and the lives of the few of us who are still here. We may not always get along, but whether crew, civilian, or friends found along the way, we are all survivors. Bound together against impossible odds, the best among us will lead us all to a new beginning. For our pursuers will not yield. And this is not our end. The Forever Star calls me across the vastness of space, a beacon of hope, of home. And we will heed its call.
So hopefully that gives you a bit of an overview of kind of some of the stuff going on in this game. There's a bunch of characters. We have the player can choose to start from anywhere between 60 to 100 characters, and they can rescue a whole lot more than that. We need to be able to support all of those characters, a big cast. They need to be expressive. They need to be kind of humanistic. We need to be able to see character. We need to be able to tell ourselves stories about these people and believe they've got a bit more going on in their lives. At the same time, we need to be able to handle them all being a bit different. They're not all exactly the same. We have different special roles, such as the princess. We have our robot friend, who is going to have a bit fewer capabilities and everything. And we've got our friend the pig, who is just going to come along for the ride and be pretty useless, but I don't think anyone has ever complained about having Ham on the ship. And one of the biggest restrictions we have as well is we need this thing to be able to be built quickly and by designers who don't have engineering support all the time. We need them to be able to run off on their own. We're not that big a team. We're a team of, on this project there are three designers and like a half dozen engineers kind of working directly on this game. A few more people around. Those numbers fluctuate depending on who's available and stuff. But you know, we're bigger than I've been at teams I've been at in the past, but we're not that big. So we really need to use our time smartly because we have chosen to make a very big game. So how are we going to solve this problem? The solution we came to, and I'll go into a bit more about how we got there and what this giant thing on the right is, don't feel like you have to read that, is a work manager, which is just a tree of behaviors with tasks at the leaves. It's sort of like a fall-through kind of AI structure, but the way we evaluate it and everything is a lot more ship-centric than you might think at first. It's not character-centric, where characters are choosing what to do. It's like the entire ship is being evaluated at once. So I want to take a little bit of a segue for a moment to talk about how log creates, like what our process looks like. And for this project, at least, we made a completely throwaway prototype. And this is a little example of it, of some of our beans running around, as we called them, between a bunch of tasks. So we only had, this was like a month or two in with 2 engineers on it. And we were experimenting with AI and crowd controls and how can we make something that's fun to play with, but also that's going to express what we need and the needs we have. And we found that this worked pretty well. We just had a bunch of tasks, which are those big geometric shapes, and we had characters that would run around and choose what to respond to. It worked pretty okay. But even at this scale, we were starting to see some potential issues that could arise. Just those moments of, why isn't anyone, or why isn't this person here doing that task they're right next to? And things like that. And that is kind of one of the key problems we had to solve, was we need to not just make characters look smart, we need to make the ship as a whole look smart. So as a little moment, I'm going to be referring pretty heavily to the configs we use. They're pretty much scriptable objects if you're familiar with Unity. It's a container for some data that doesn't exist in the world. And we have lots of them. So this is kind of what I was getting at earlier. We have, one of the early decisions we had was, is it going to be kind of more character or more task authoritative? And there's ways to blend these, and we end up with a bit of a mix, but this was sort of where we started out. Character authoritative is pretty common. It's how a lot of people will think about designing AI in games. It's a character is going to go through a tree or some utility method or however else to decide, what am I going to do next? It works quite well in a lot of cases, but once you start to have a bunch of crew over a fairly big ship, the best person to do a task isn't always going to be immediately available, and they might not be evaluating at the right time. Say if a really high priority task comes up, you don't want someone who just finished something else on the other side of the ship being like, I can do that, and then running across the ship for 5 minutes while everyone else ignores the thing because someone's on the way. We also don't want things like a character who is just a little bit peckish, taking a meal that was reserved that really should go to someone who's starving. So one attempt to solve that is to be a bit more task authoritative. Each task is instead going to choose who will do it. And then that way we can pick the most appropriate characters for the task. There's a risk of this seeming a bit too altruistic, about the crew sort of just seeming like mindless robots or something rather than actually living, breathing people. And it can have some complications for prioritizing. These are more kind of the concerns we had that we had to overcome. And yeah, we'll go into a bit what happened there. But the real concern with that sort of method is like, why is a character doing this? Like, why are they going to do something when someone else could have done it and they could have gone and got a meal or whatever they needed? So again, don't feel like you have to look at this one too heavily, but this was the initial design we had as of 2 years ago. We were going to have a bunch of high-level behaviors that a character would assess in order. And then some of those behaviors, if they needed to do it, would be going to a special manager which would choose who went where. So we took this idea, we played around with it a bit, and what we settled on doing instead was experimenting with, well, could we just have one kind of supervisor manager? And so we saw how far we could push that, and it kept working, and we kept pushing it further, and eventually we got to the point where we have these nested behaviors, which are kind of the core of our thing. So it'll all be assessed top to bottom, each node assessing all of its children to decide what the characters are going to do. All the way up the top, we have our forced actions, so which can include things like death. If a character needs to die, that's just an AI task, which means they'll be told, this is your next job. Wrap up whatever work you're doing, and when you get around to it, please die for me. It actually worked really nicely. There's all kinds of stuff which you might not think of as like an AI task exactly, but that we can just play into this. And that solves all of the issues of, well, what if someone dies halfway through doing a thing? Well, it's a bit like, you know, like 2 Point Hospital or something. You know, the characters don't die midway through doing a thing. In 2 Point, they'll walk out to the next room and fall over there. We will interrupt whatever the task is by the same method that will allow us to interrupt anything. You can see we go down the tree a bit more. We have things like combat, responding to enemies on the ship. Then we'll have all of our work abilities and then all of our crew needs. And this is a vastly simplified version of it. We have so much going on that I think I'll show you a little bit later. One of the main ways that we filter who's going to be doing what and you know who's eligible for doing things is character tags. So these are pretty much just a label, more or less. Generally, they won't have any data on them, but they can in some cases. And it's just saying this is something about the character. If you've done ECS or anything like that, it's a pretty common methodology there as well. Just a little label that we can query from all sorts of different systems across the game, and then our systems don't really need to be too heavily coupled together. We use them to track a bunch of things about identity, like, you know, is this the pig or the robot, or what division are they in? We can use it to track moods, or we can use it to track a lot of hidden kind of stuff, like for the AI, like, are they alert to an enemy? Even, is this character not seen by the player and doing something important, and we want to cheat and teleport them? We can do that via just adding some tags to say, you're doing something important enough to teleport if you need to. And we use those to feed all kinds of parts of the game. So all of our animation systems, they don't need to be hooked up directly to the configs of the characters. They can just be like, well, if I'm given a character who has the pig tag, play the pig animation. And we can do stuff like that. And yeah. They're really cheap to query. They're just in a dictionary, so we can use them everywhere, and we can use them really heavily in all of our preconditions, which are choosing who does what behaviors. You can see on the right just a list of some tags on a random character I picked out of the game. It even includes things like you know, animal lover or some of their background information. So let's take another look at this. This is kind of what the work manager is doing. Again, you can see it's sort of similar structure to before. We have our forced actions, but this time you can see we've put a bit more information on death. We're checking a precondition, that the health is currently 0. And if character passes all those preconditions, they can go into that. We have a bunch more preconditions on the work parent, and that will allow to check anyone who gets assigned to a child behavior of work, that they're on duty, and that whatever child tasks have gravity and are in rooms without hazards. So our orange nodes there are the tasks. They can either be like singletons in the case of the death task. It doesn't really exist in the world physically, or it can be like a kitchen or something which characters are going to interact with. So the way the work manager runs, we actually just run it at a fixed cadence. We started off with it less frequent, but it was cheap enough that we just made it run more frequently. This means all the characters on the ship run it at the same time. And whoever isn't on a currently valid task, we go, cool, you're available. And we get all those characters and we throw them through the whole system. I mean, I've got some text there. I won't bother reading it all out, but it's all of what's going on here. We're assessing characters against a bunch of preconditions. Probably the important part here is that for each behavior, we're assessing all of the tasks on it. We're getting all of the tasks and all of the characters who are valid, and then we're finding the best pairings of those. So which character is going to be best for each task, and we're scoring them based on distance. So that way we'll always get kind of the best mix we can of responsiveness and everything like that. The system is very flexible, and you can see an example of that with the pig getting a gun on them and then being a combat pig. We weren't able to ship this one. I think someone had issues with it. Like, I don't get it, but it's very little stopping a pig from getting a gun and fighting the borders if we let them. So here's the sort of the example from before again with sort of two different soda machines, and we can show we have two different ways for characters to be assigned to it. One of the really neat thing about these stacked behaviors is we can be like, hey, there's two different paths to the same end behavior, and they can be at different priorities in the tree. So if someone is really thirsty, like they're going to start taking health damage, that can be a much higher priority thing for the character to deal with. They'll do that ahead of working, but if they don't need it, they can come back at a lower priority and say, hey, well, I haven't got any work to do right now. Am I a little bit thirsty? Then they can get assigned at a lower priority. This is kind of an example of how it might look if we're getting 4 characters here. So we've got our off-duty supply character, we've got our science officer, an engineering character, and we've got Ham. So we can see we're assessing them against a bunch of things and we're checking them in order. So we're starting off, I imagine this has like 100 nodes in it instead of the 6 or so I've got here, but there's some important stuff we've skipped over. The critical needs itself doesn't have any preconditions, so we're just going to check all of its children. And only one of the characters, our blue science officer there, has a critical thirst. So they're going to get assigned the first soda machine. And you can see there that there's a little P1, P2, P3. That's kind of tracking the priority of each of those behaviors. And then we can store that, hey, we've assigned that character with priority 3. That means that when we come back later, if we have a bunch of interruption support and things like that, we know don't put this character on anything less important than priority 3. And at the same time, if we have someone who really needs to use this thing at a higher priority, maybe we can let them interrupt. We then go and we assess work. We look at who's on duty. In this case, the blue and yellow characters were, but the blue character's already busy, so we're not really assessing them anymore. So the yellow character will probably get assigned some work to do if there's anything worth doing on the ship. Then we'll come back to needs again, and we'll look at who's not on duty. In this case, it's just our green friend and Ham. So we'll look at who has thirst diminished. Both of them do. They weren't critical before, but they are diminished. They wouldn't mind a drink, and Ham happened to be closer, so Ham gets to go and get stuck in the soda machine. I'd like to throw a little aside in here. Serialized reference is a really handy thing, which feels new to me, but it was actually added in 2019. It just took me a couple of years to catch on. And it's a way of polymorphically serializing any kind of any classes that you may have that extend some interface. So we use it a bunch. We use it for all of our preconditions. So the preconditions all just implement an interface, but they can check all kinds of different things in the game. We use injection to inject in whatever they need to care about, and they can test characters, tasks. And in the editor, we just get one list, and we can have whatever kind of data we need to in it. So let's take a look at what our tasks are. We talked about behaviors before. That's the tree of things. The tasks are those orange nodes at the end, a thing that the character can do. 95% of the time for us, it's going to be what we call a modular task. And these, they exist in the world. They're going to be on a placeable prop, such as a kitchen, or they're going to be the singletons, like the death task. And these are built in such a way that design can stick together all of these modules that we've pre-authored, and in a way that allows them to create most things that they're wanting to add to the game, they can do without our direct involvement. If they want to add a new type of kitchen or a new processing thing, which is going to play an animation and then modify some resources, they can set that up themselves without needing to grab us unless they're doing something particularly weird. These modules can be states, so they run over time with a little asynchronous task, or they can be instantaneous. And that mix allows us to express pretty much everything. You can think of it as being a lot like visual scripting, with the slight caveat that we're really just controlling the way flow goes together. We're not actually putting values on wires. We're not able to do math and stuff like that. But this gives us most of the expressibility we needed. It's also a lot easier than putting together a full-on visual scripting system. So this can be a really nice in-between if you want to give your designers some control. So our task modules are these little scripts that can be stuck together. We use them to do stuff like play timeline animations, modify resources, add and remove tags, but they can do all sorts of whatever. If you need a little script to do something or to control the way the flow is working, they can do that. So this is the entire file for a chance module, which just gives a chance of rolling an outcome and doing some other stuff. So we can nest other task modules on it. And these are really easy to put together. We actually have designers will run off and write some unsanctioned code to add their own modules when they feel like it. And we'll have to come in and be like, well, we like what you're going for, but let's change it up a bit. But often they're quite good and they get it on their own. One of the downsides with these is that they do exist on a shared object. They exist on the placeable or on the singleton themselves. So if you want to store any per character information, you kind of have to store it within the unitask itself, which is just like a unitask is like an asynchronous task, kind of like a coroutine if you've used those as well. We also pass in a bunch of stuff in the task module context, so that'll be stuff specific to this particular run, like which character is being passed in or what the task is on if we want to grab hold of that. But we can also inject anything that we do need from the broader game. We can get particular managers, we can get the placeable it's running on, or say the inventory of the placeable, anything like that, we can just inject on this file. And so here's a little bit of feedback from one of the designers working on the project. I'll let you read it, but yeah, like AI blocks, and I'll take that as high praise. You can see an example of one of these systems on the right. So this is just an animation sequence. We can set up what timeline sequence is going to be playing, any parameters we want to set on it. When we arrive and are using the sequence, it's going to wait a while, and then it's going to modify some resources. It's going to, yes, spend 2 raw materials and output 1 metal, and that's one of our resource processing machines. And anytime design want to set up anything like this, they can do that. If they want to set up a more complicated variant, if they want it to do weird animation things or interact a few characters together, it's all just kind of the same building blocks. And these task modules have been really handy across the project, not just in the tasks, but we're able to reuse them on things like tags. When we add a tag to a character, we can add a tag modular task, and we can use that to do something like, well, let's deplete your morale a little bit and show a little speech bubble when you get injured. We can also use them for our story event system, which runs all of our tutorials. It runs little events that might happen in the world, can control the way threats pop up when the Zootopans catch up to your ship. And it's using all the same modules, and all of this stuff is kind of intercompatible with each other. As we build a module for one part of the system, it's able to be used everywhere else. Reuse is a really big theme in modularity. For instance, when we added enemies, they were actually very little work to get set up and start using them. We would already set up social interactions, and combat is just a social interaction, but you have a gun. So, I mean, really, it's the same thing. You need 2 characters to go near each other, and maybe they're both doing it, they're both running in to punch each other, or maybe one's just like waving at the other as they run away, or shooting at the other as they run away. It's all pretty similar. So the only addition we really needed was we needed the concept of these 2 characters are not friends, they're on different factions. And those are the people that you're valid to have a fighting social interaction with. Those enemies, we just put them into the exact same work manager as everyone else. So there is a high-level node for combat for the invaders, which is a little bit different. It gives them a couple of extra capabilities, like pulling a gun out of their pocket if they go and drop it. But as a fallback, they just fall back into the regular crew behaviors. And there are limitations as to, well, we don't want them going and cooking a meal. But if they're hungry and there's a meal in their room, they will absolutely go and grab it and sit down at your mess table and start eating it. And we get that pretty much for free just by throwing them into the same system as everyone else. So at some point, you've built a complicated system. Things are going to go wrong. This one didn't need a whole lot of investigation. It was sort of a, oh yeah, I told them to shoot any locked door they encounter so they can get through the ship, but airlocks are technically doors, and it is technically locked, so that was a little good little moment there. But at some point, there are going to be things that go wrong that you don't understand, or you don't know why it's going wrong. You're going to need some tools to look into it. The easiest option, and that's probably going to be natural to all the engineers in the room, is, well, what's the data going on? What can I do to look into the system I've built? And it can be really handy, and it can help you out a lot. And for this system here, it's just a list of all of those tasks, all those behaviors, and all of their nested behaviors all the way down to the tasks, and it has all the preconditions which are assessed at every level. So we can look at that, we can see how many characters are passing at each level. We can even hover over those and get little gizmos in the world with a little halo above the heads of characters to see, did they pass or fail any particular precondition? So these ones were great for engineering, and they were all right for design too, but you need to consider what other people are going to need. We pretty quickly realized, well, we need to be able to look at this in an individual character context as well. What is a particular character doing? So when we select a character, you can see on the left there is kind of what the UI in the game looks like. And even before we had this online, we built our system on the right, which would show all of the, you can select a character in the world or in the scene and see all of the different tags they have, all of their needs values. Are they hungry? Are they thirsty? You can modify those, fill or replenish them all, and we can see, well, what are they up to? What have they currently been assigned to? And what's their kind of action state? Are they stuck in the middle of locomotion? Do they think they're playing a timeline sequence, but they're kind of just standing in the middle of the room? You can sort of start to debug what's going on there, and that can be really handy for engineers as well. But it's not just engineers and designers on the project. You need to think about everyone. So for a lot of us, that will often be getting the art department involved or something like that, but it's easy to not think about the QA department, but they're some of the people who can benefit the most from really good tools. So we had all of these cool tools that we built. They were all in the Unity editor, and we didn't have them running in the standalone build at the moment. We're just using editor UI, and I was sort of thinking, oh, this will be really cool to get running in the build. And I went and talked to QA to see, do you want these tools in the build? And they just said, no, that's not the tools they need. So there are tools that benefit them a lot, but there's going to be things that speed up testing time or stress testing and digging into a feature, and those tools didn't really do that. So at Log, we have a really good QA department. We have several people working full-time on testing our games. They don't use Unity. All the testing is done in builds, and if we want to give them tools, they have to be through debug consoles and things like that. If we give them good tools, they can give us good information. So we just added a bunch of different tools so we can spawn characters. The example here is the more useful way of looking at tags. We just have a show all of the tags, and it'll show everything that's on each of those characters. So QA can be like, oh, hey, well, this is what seemed to be going on with that character. We can look at inventories, all kinds of stuff. And the thing about these is they often tend to be a bit less clunky than those engineer-facing tools we built in the start. So, you know, you can end up using them more than the other tools yourself anyway. And one of the things that we were really concerned about early on, and I think I kind of alluded to this a bit in like the submission I did for this talk, was performance. We were really concerned that we can have hundreds of characters in this game. The AI needs to handle that. And so we put a bunch of thought into how we can optimize this, how we can structure the entire thing so it can run fast, so we can streamline all of our preconditions together and do bit masks and all kinds of wacky fun stuff. I love getting into that stuff, and I need to be careful not to do too much of it, and maybe some of you can relate. But we did regular performance passes to clean up all the most expensive bits, and you can see here are a few slides we took over the years of like, well, this is where our work managers are at. It started off taking like 100 milliseconds when it evaluated. And we've got it down to just a few milliseconds most of the time now. And I'm sure that number's probably gone back up again since whenever I took that picture earlier in the year, but I haven't run the tests again since. I think there's bigger performance issues. So, we launched a game. That's pretty cool. Game's out in early access now. Can't wait to hear what the players have to say. Thank you. So, yeah, it went a bit rough. The reviews were a bit not overwhelmingly positive. You can say that much. We kind of dropped into mixed reviews on Steam there, and a lot of the complaints they're really valid complaints talking about the game not feeling ready, that they don't have enough control over the AI, or the AI were just getting stuck or not doing the things they needed to be doing, and all of these kind of issues. So we got given a list of, hey, these are the worst offending issues we're seeing. Let's start working on them. So you can see just a bunch of the merge requests just around crew getting stuck that we were doing, around all these different, not necessarily connected cases of, well, here they're getting stuck in a clump, and here they're getting stuck waiting for a task to do, here they're in a weird animation, or they're halfway into the floor for some reason. All these different things. So we worked on a bunch of that kind of stuff. After save load was another big thing. We also had people raising issues that, well, the crew aren't filling their needs. They're all getting thirsty or hungry, and I can see I've got the objects on the ship. Why aren't the people using them enough? We had issues with crew was slow to respond. If you tried to build something in 0 oxygen, people would just run into the room, panic, and run out again, which is particularly bad if the room has like a broken airlock or a broken oxygen generator, and you really need someone to go in there and fix it. And we started to experiment with the idea of orders and getting the player to be like, hey, this is a high priority thing. We'd put a little bit of that in, but people were saying there's not enough. So I would like to just give a little shout out to, we had a really amazing community team working on this game. And they were out interacting with the players, they're bringing us reports, they're making sure we know what's going on, what's hurting people the most, and what we need to fix as a priority. And they're helping us communicate all of this back to the players. There were some really good, transparent posts about this is what's going on. And I think one of the best signs of that success is we were releasing some hotfixes and everything, but even just recently, and it's been a couple of weeks since we launched a patch, we've just dropped back up to like mostly positive in recent reviews, and especially in English language reviews, which is what our community team is the most active in. So there's been, and I think there's going to be some talks about kind of community stuff going on. So yeah, they know their stuff. But anyway, back to our AI. We had a few features that we really wanted to get in, but we just didn't quite have time to get to. Especially, I was sort of the main person on AI for a lot of the time. We had a couple of other people coming in when they had time to help out. But we've prioritized a few of these things and really got them in for the first content update, which is going to be going out within the next couple of weeks. The first major content update. We've been doing patches and stuff like that, but yeah. So one of those things was a work-safe manager, something to be, hey, if you're going somewhere dangerous, make sure you have appropriate protective gear. So we were able to kind of, because of how modular all of our systems are, we were able to slot in, well, if your pathing module has told you to go to this place over here, and that place over there doesn't have any air, you can go to the work-safe manager and be like, hey, where can I get some protective gear for that? It has a prioritized list of, well, you want a spacesuit, and if there aren't any of those, you want a helmet. And then that can feed back into, well, here's the task to get a spacesuit. Do I meet the preconditions for it? And then can I go and get it? What's the closest one? So it was able to be spun up relatively quickly, maybe a week or something, to get what's a kind of fundamental change to the way they go about getting to places. And honestly, it's something that we've been wanting for a while. Say when a character is unconscious, someone else grabs a med pack and then goes to them. But the way we did that was a bit of a hack. You know, it's like, well, someone somewhere is unconscious on the ship, so everyone who can grab a med pack, get a med pack. And then we'll just see who's closest, and they can go and actually revive them. So this is actually giving us a tool now that will, in the future, potentially allow us to be like, well, whoever's actually reviving them can get a med pack on the way. Another thing was queuing. We didn't really have, we had waiting states explicitly on a few objects, but that whole thing about characters not filling their needs, about all standing around thirsty while there's this unused soda machine, the soda machine was reserved for someone. They were just running there from the other side of the ship. So they're going to spend like 30, 40 seconds running and then 5 seconds to grab a drink. And to a player, that looks like this thing's just not being used at all. So we added like a bit of a waiting state where we can, on certain behaviors, we can choose what we turn it on for. We can be like, hey, I want 3 characters to get assigned to queue for this thing. So those characters will be like, well, I want a drink. I'm eligible for it, and this drink machine over here seems like it's working. Someone's using it, but I'm willing to queue up for about this long. And they get assigned while someone else is there. And most of the time, this is actually not even visible to players because that character is still on the way over, and as they're kind of about to get there, the previous person finishes up. If it's for some other things, like using a shower, which takes a bit longer, we have the queuing behavior there as well, and we just play like a really like passive-aggressive kind of impatient timeline. And it really conveys, hey, maybe you should build some more of these things. So it really achieves both purposes, and it means these objects aren't sitting around empty while the player has a starving or dehydrating crew. One thing that was a bit of a pain was serialization. We just didn't really handle save and load for the AI at all. The initial kind of thoughts were, well, we're getting to serialization later. When we load a save, we'll just spawn the AI where they were. They'll probably pick up the same tasks. It'll look good enough. So a little bit late in development, we started doing our serializing. And we realized, okay, we're going to start serializing a little bit more about them. We need to know what their current task was. And then once we know what their task was, we started needing to know a little bit more and a little bit more information. And then we're getting to the point now where we're like, well, it'd be great if we serialize the whole thing, but turns out asynchronous tasks are not an easy thing to save your process on, especially when you have asynchronous nested tasks calling each other like 5 layers deep, and you want to resume into the same state. That's going to require probably a pretty big overhaul about how our nested tasks are going to work. So it really wasn't the smoothest process. It's been one of the biggest pain points for us, but we're getting somewhere with it. So I want to talk about some of the lessons we've learned out of this. So initially, our AI performance we were really concerned about hasn't really been an issue, and that's probably a success on our part, but it does leave us going like, oh, well, maybe we should have been worrying about the other stuff more. There are some player comments about performance, but they don't seem to be in the way that we'd attribute to the AI specifically, so much as the game as a whole. One of the best things about what we've created is designers are able to make a lot of things without engineering support. We can have just a limited amount of engineers kind of helping out our design team as they churn through hundreds of like items that the players can place and crew can interact with and all that sort of stuff. And we only need to help them out when they want to do something new and particularly weird. The system was modular, and that modularity allowed us to introduce things like the queuing. And when you can build a system like that, and it can become a tick box on any particular task. It can be like, well, I need this thing to support queuing as well. And because they're all using the same modules, you can kind of get that. The hostile characters were spun up with very little work too as well, and they just slotted in super easily. We were really happy with how those came together. But serialization was a massive pain. It would have been good to get working on earlier. We was definitely thinking about it, and we had some concerns, but yeah, it really just came out in the wash, I guess. If you're making a similar game, I definitely encourage think about modular systems. Think about how you can make it so it's easy to extend in the future, or even to have your core building blocks be isolated enough that you can change those fundamental building blocks. Consider what level your crew are making, your AI are making their decisions at. Do you actually want them to be done at the level of individual characters, or are you going to get a better effect from having the crew as a whole? We still have kind of the illusion of selfish characters. We can just put tasks very high up in the priority list, which are only good for the individual character or even actively negative for the ship. But this cadence and the decision making is still being done for the ship as a whole. And lastly, make sure you empower everyone on your team. We have engineers, designers, and QA artists as well, and we all have different kind of needs and requirements. And really think about how can you get the most out of everyone on your team. So I guess lastly, this is just a few of my kind of personal hopes, the sort of things which the system might allow us to do. It's not a roadmap, it's not promises. Players, don't look at this. This is just like stuff that I'd like to see. It's like we can play around with more orders to change what kind of stuff the player can influence with. I'd love for our queuing system doesn't really, it works on, say like, I need to get a drink, but not, well, in 10 minutes or in like 30 seconds, I'm going off shift. Does anyone want to take over? We don't really have support for that at the moment. And I think that'd be a cool kind of thing to have. And it's the kind of thing that wouldn't be too difficult to add with this sort of system. We have full serialization of modular tasks. That would be great, but who knows where we'll be getting with that one. That's going to be a really big ask to actually get it. And optimization is always a nice thing for us to keep an eye on. And, you know, maybe it's not as needed as it has been at different points, but it's something we can always think about. And I've got all these thoughts in the back of my head of, oh, I can optimize the hell out of this random bit. We do not need to do that right now. So yeah, that's Jumplight Odyssey. That's our AI. I think I've got about 10 minutes for questions. Yep, down the front. I've got a microphone coming to you.
I'm coming. Sorry.
Thank you. When you started off with a talk, it sounded like you were very structured, like a behavior tree. But then, like, as you went into like ordering and stuff, it kind of went into goal-oriented action plans. It's kind of like a blend. A
little bit, yeah. So it's still very much a behavior tree, and the orders just allow us to turn on high-level behaviors as like a override of that priority. So it's just, here's a new path through the tree to whatever behavior was previously down here. Now it's up here with a new path to it, because we've prioritized that task, or we've spawned new tasks, or however we may want to do orders. Some of the orders are like, hey, princess, go inspire this person, and that'll spawn a new task at the person to go and inspire them.
Awesome. Have you ever thought about also like teamwork or group tasks that require 2 or more agents?
Yeah, so we do have some tasks which allow for multiple people to come together, and we have things like a chess table or a card table where multiple people will come together. We'll sort of have someone will initiate the task, and then there will be sort of higher priority tasks to go and join in on something that is running. And that's sort of how we've got that cooperation and everything going on. So that's sort of the main case, as well as just, I'm doing a thing, come follow me. Say in the case of combat, we'll have leaders on each team which will be running into the fight, and they might bring other people along with them.
Thank you.
Cheers.
With regard to how you were measuring which of your characters were going to the task to do them, was it easy for you to change how you measure that across all of your behaviours, or is it something you would have to go and modify each of the behaviours? I can give you an example if you like.
Yeah, so we have like just a distance metric, and it all goes through a single, get me the estimate. Inside the work manager, it's like, well, how good is each task? What's the position of the task? What's the position of the character? And it just does a really crude distance measurement that kind of accounts for there being multiple stacked decks on top of each other. So we really penalize going to a different deck if you don't need to. In most cases, it's just pure distance-based, but in some cases, we are actually able to override that if we want. So when we have the queuing system online, on specifically those tasks that have queuing, we stop doing crude distance, and we instead look at, well, how long is it going to take me to get there based on like a Manhattan distance and my movement speed, and considering the turbo lift path you'd have to take, as well as how long will I have to wait once I get there, how many people are already queuing for the thing. And so that gives us a bit better performance. And we can swap that out just in one place if we wanted to improve that metric, or you have different metrics in the future.
It sounds like you've shifted towards task authoritative over character authoritative.
Yep.
I was just wondering if there's sort of an overlap between them and how you've sort of determined whether a task belongs in one or the other.
Yeah, so we definitely have a task authoritative system, but at the same time, the tasks we've set up in it include some really sort of character-focused stuff, like a character whose morale is reduced to 0 will go into despair. And then there will be tasks right up the top of the tree which are like, you're despairing, maybe go light a fire or something. And so it's not good for the ship, it's not good for the characters particularly, but it's what they're going to do. And so that allows us to kind of get an illusion of character-focused stuff by having these character-focused tasks. Does that sort of answer what you're getting at? Yeah. Yeah, awesome, thank you.
So you mentioned approaching serialization early in the process. If you were doing this project from the start, how do you think you'd sort of solve that problem with such complex, like async tasks? Do you think it would change how you'd approach designing the tasks?
Yeah, I think I definitely look at, rather than just run task and forget, like how can we, track some kind of progress on these things and some kind of state so that they're returning, I'm at a point where it is safe to serialize me, or I should run again, or I should not run again, that kind of stuff. So really just from the core, bottom up, thinking about that kind of stuff and how we can integrate it. Oh yeah, we've got someone over.
Just on that answer that you just gave then, and what I was going to ask is sort of, it suggests that you're not using a blackboard for that. Is there a reason you chose not to use an AI blackboard to have all the data dumped in one world place that you could draw from for those async tasks, or is that just a design decision?
We do have access to a lot of the stuff like that we're passing in, so we have context information. We don't have a blackboard explicitly, but we have access to the character and we can query a lot of things about them. And then anything that was more expensive to query, we just start caching.
Hi, Ellie. Do you ever reassess priorities? So say someone gets assigned a task and they're on the other side of the ship, and then a second later someone becomes available and they're right next to it? Or once something's assigned, is that kind of it?
We do a limited amount of that. We're able to, certain tasks, we're able to flag, say, a construction task. If there's an engineer already in the room, they can actually replace them because we've ticked this thing, which is like, hey, this is a task where a bunch of people are going to come to do 10 tasks in the same room. And if they finish their first task and there's another one right next to them that no one's doing, we want them to go and do that. We don't want to wait for the person to get there from the other side of the ship. But for a lot of other tasks, if they're lower priority kind of stuff, yeah, we're not interrupting them. We're starting to do that now that we have queuing coming online, because we can sort of be like, well, you were going to queue for this behavior anyway, so we've deemed it safe to kind of swap people in and out on it. But yeah, we're doing a limited amount of that, but it's not across the board.
I'm really fascinated by the QA challenges on this. And I was thinking, as you're talking, like a ship's log, have you been using any machine learning to, like, I don't know, summarize, like, the story of the ship?
We don't have any kind of machine learning stuff set up, but we do log. We log events as they happen onto the character, and it's just like a raw log of, hey, here's some important things that happened to the character, as well as higher level, here's some important things that happen to the ship. So a player can kind of see that stuff. And it's the sort of thing where we provide it in just enough detail. We provide some information there that a player can dig into and explore and be like, oh, these two characters chatted and then they formed a rivalry. And now one of them is grumpy. And, you know, we provide those little building blocks and let the players form narratives in their head. Say, there were some boarders who came onto the ship and the combat person went and fought them off. And now after the combat's over, they're going to go and hug someone who their partner. And a player can see that and they can tell all kinds of stories about it way better than we can. That was like one of the first examples I saw where I was like, oh, I get the game. Like, this is kind of that moment. Anyone else?
For the last question.
Yeah, last question. Okay. Yeah, we are pretty much at time. I'm happy to stick around up the front or outside the room if anyone wants to come and talk to me about any more of this stuff. Yeah.
Where'd you go? Ah, there you are.
Hey, thanks for the talk. I was particularly interested in the debugging side. The tools you went through were really good, but did you have any sort of tools or overlooks to look at the state at a given time and go, oh, this is actually like a good state that everything is in, or is this like a favorable state from a design perspective? Because there's so much going on at any time.
Yeah, we definitely have like tools which even for the player we're showing there are this many characters on the ship who are hungry or thirsty or whatever. So we have that kind of stuff for assessing is the ship in a good state, and you can kind of scan around and keep an eye on what's going on. Our QA are really good at knowing what the ship looks like and what it's supposed to look like and what it looks like when it's having a good or a bad time. Yeah, does that kind of get at what you're asking? Yeah. Thank you all for coming to the talk. I'll be here.